We're going to start in 1 second. Get my video panel back to working. So I can see you guys. Video panel. And we're going to. Okay. This one we can. Okay. All right. Let us begin. Hopefully, all the technology works. I think tonight's class, you're going to enjoy it. So I'm coming through nice and clear, and everything is good. Let me make sure I click on the screen. So, all right. Class number 3, Beyond Right. Very interesting course about social responsibility, society, to ourselves. And tonight we're going to speak to the responsibility towards others. So as opposed to other classes where we started with teachings and then brought up a case study, tonight we're going to begin with a case study and then bring in the teachings to apply it. So open up your books to page 76. We'll start off with case study A. Case study A, let me move the video panel a little higher. Takes up as little of the screen as possible. So case study A, what's that? Why is that black box there? Hide, show some of you, hide, video panel, hide, here you go. Okay, better, right. So case study A is very interesting because it's a case that you guys might remember. It's a story of a white supremacist going into a black church in Texas and shooting a bunch of people. Now, what makes this case interesting is that his friend knew about it, as you can see in reading about it. And not only he failed to tell the authorities beforehand, but when the FBI questioned him following, he lied and then he changed the story. In the end, he was sentenced for 27 months. I think, as you see it towards the end, he admitted to lying. He also admitted that on the night of the shootings, after concluding that Mr. Roof was responsible for the attack, he told others not to contact law enforcement. So Joseph Meek knew of Dylan Roof's intention to commit massacre and chose not to report it to the authorities who could have prevented it. Despite that, his failure to report a planned crime in advance did not constitute a legal offense. In your opinion, should the act of reporting a plot that involves serious crime be considered commendable? Obviously, prior to the offense. Morally imperative or a legal obligation? Larry, we'll start with you. Want to get to one second. You can think about it while watch the board. So, Larry, what say you? Larry, can you hear me? Larry? Oopa. Larry, can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. I just turned the audio on again. What's the question?
The question is, should the act of reporting a plot that involves serious crime be considered commendable, morally imperative, or a legal obligation? What do you say? Case study A.
Well, I think he was morally obligated, legally obligated to both of them. You know, he was obligated to let the authorities know that he knew that something bad was going to happen.
So which one is it? Morally obligated or legally obligated?
I don't know the law. I know
it's your opinion. I'm not asking what's your opinion.
My opinion is he should be legally obligated.
Okay, case study number B. Page 78. Rachel is going down the street. She sees that the owner left the air conditioner on. Doesn't know who the owner is, but she can, if she puts in a little effort, going to the neighboring stores. They're still open. Contact the store owner. Tell him that his lights, air conditioner is on. Ira, in your opinion, should the effort to alert the store owner of a costly oversight be considered commendable, morally imperative, or legal obligation? What say you?
I think she has the person has a moral imperative. I mean, I got an example of this a couple of days ago. One of my neighbors, they came home. I know them. They left their hatch open of their car, wide open, and there were a couple of cases of water and something. And I saw it and I said, well, maybe they're going to come out. But then when I went out again, I saw they didn't close it. So I went over and knocked on their door and I said, hey, do you realize that your hatch is open in your car? And she was saying, oh, I forgot all about it. I was all, I got sidetracked and I forgot about it. So in that case, you have, I don't know if it's moral, you have a moral responsibility.
Moral responsibility. Okay, case study number 3.
Wrong,
All right. Case study number 3. This was a famous study that came out a couple of years ago by Pew study. I'm not going to get into all the, you can read it without getting into all the information. You can see on page 79 and page 80. The Pew study paints a pretty grim picture about Jewish identity in the United States. Didn't take it to, in fact, Chabad is the one community that actually is growing. And so we see that children of parents that are not raised with a strong Jewish atmosphere, background, however you want to call it, they don't identify as Jewish later on. So the question is, how much of a obligation do you have about someone else's observance? This is the question towards the end after the figure on page 80, which is, what should we do to reverse the trend of weakening Jewish identity? And I guess the stronger question is if someone else's degree of religious observance any business of yours? I mean, yeah, it can bother you, but the question is, can you do anything about it? Michael J.
Be a good example.
What?
Be a good example.
Be a good example. So you're saying that you're saying that you just try to be a good example. If a person wants to pick up on it, fine, but to actually be proactive, that's not.
In my case, being a good example is being proactive.
But
I have 2 teenage children who fall into this category, and
so when I mean proactive, I mean going to them, talking to them, offering them Jewish observances or something of the like.
In their case, pushing, I know my children, so pushing is a problem. Being an example, mentioning things along the way.
If you come to dinner on, okay,
yeah.
All right, so the case A, which was the Dylan Roof preventing a mass murder, everyone obviously will agree and admit that he should do the nice thing, and the morally acceptable thing is to warn the authorities to try to stop that massacre from happening. Now, interestingly, there is no legal obligation for that gentleman. I think it was a Mr. Meat. Was that what his name? I'm long day. Meek. Sorry, Meek with a K. There's no legal obligation for Mr. Meek to warn the authorities of this impending doom. In other countries, I think France and Germany, they have a law that says you have to try to prevent the disaster. But in the United States, there is no such law. So the interesting thing over here, Mr. Meek's, according to secular law, Mr. Meek's crime was not in not trying to prevent a disaster. Rather, his crime was in lying to the authorities when they were investigating the massacre. So case B, it would seem like, it's commendable, right? It's a nice thing to do, to tell the owner that his air conditioner is running for no reason. Is not responsibility. In case number 3, case number 3, obviously the crowd over here is tainted because you guys are coming to class at Chabad, which that's kind of what we do. But
You tainted us.
I tainted it, yeah, exactly. But the question is, what's our responsibility? What's my responsibility? We say it's a community matter, but really, how one chooses to live his life, that's his business. It's not business. It's not my business. And the question is, we're going to discover tonight is, what's the Torah's view on our responsibility to others? Now, I'll say it now, and someone's saying something. I'm sorry.
I was just saying that our obligation as one to another would be to help them.
Okay, so we're going to put aside. I mean, I'll say it again later, but we're obviously going to put aside the obligation to prevent physical harm or death, because that goes without saying. This course is more about monetary damage, because that's where really civil law and Jewish law are pretty much different. Let's begin first with establishing the connection that every person has to another. Now, the context of this connection is said in the Torah and in the Midrash and in Maimonides. It's discussing the Jewish community. So the framework is the Jewish community, but we can branch out from there regarding responsibility towards society at large. So you see text number 1 on page 83. This is a verse about the upcoming Jewish holiday, Shavuos, which time to plug the holiday, which is June 5th, which is just around the corner. And Sunday morning, we're going to have a reading of 10 Commandments and all the yummies that Cyril makes, and blintzes and cheesecake. So please make sure to let us know that you're coming so we can prepare properly. So when getting back into the text without getting too distracted by blintzes and cheesecake, as hard as it may be.
I'm sorry.
I lost you.
Yeah, exactly.
I lost you at blintzes. All right. So when Hashem came through Moshe and offered the Torah to the Jewish people, it says the Jewish people answered in unison, we will do everything that Hashem has said. And the Midrash on this verse says that when the Jewish people, this text number 2, accepted God's rule at Mount Sinai, they did so joyfully. And they said they all responded in unison. And doing so, they even committed each other. This is the real crux of tonight's lesson, is to serve as guarantors for each other. But what is it? What's a guarantor? A guarantor, obviously, is that when someone is giving a loan and the person loaning the money is a little worried about the person's ability to repay the loan. So what does he do? He asks the borrower to come with another party and say, listen, if this guy can't pay the loan, I will stand behind him. So many times when we view the holiday of Shavuos and we view the event of the giving of the Torah, we look at it as a time, a special ceremony between God and man. It's really my relationship with God. We don't really look at it as a relationship between one person and the other person. But what this verse is telling us, that not only did we accept a responsibility for our own personal observance and the observance of the generations following us, we also accepted the responsibility. I'm behind in my. We also accepted responsibility for the observance of others. And this responsibility encompasses the entirety of the Torah. So you're responsible for the positive observance, the dues that we have to, the Shabbat, kosher, and all that. And then we have the responsibility for the don't do's, which is to try to make sure a Jew does not violate the Torah. So we have the personal responsibility for ourselves, and we have the responsibility for each other. And the Gemara, the Midrash, gives a very nice analogy for this. You see text number 3. It said, the Midrash says, every Jew is responsible for each other. Kol Yisrael arevim zelazeh. So what does this compare to? It's compared to you're in a boat. If one person starts drilling in his cabin, you don't say, hey, that's his problem. It's in his cabin. Obviously, you realize that him drilling in his part of the ship is going to cause a problem if you as well. So in a similar vein, we view the Jewish people, and really we view all world humanity as being in one ship. When one person or one part of society is doing something that is bad, is evil, detrimental, the attitude isn't, oh, that's their problem. We view it as it's our problem as well. I think the war in Ukraine has, Mr. Putin, if you're watching, I call it a war. I'm sorry, don't put me in prison. If you're watching the war in Ukraine, you realize that although it's events happening very far away, it's causing major problems, with wheat and soybean oil and other things. So we see from here that something that happens across the world, seemingly far away from us, has a detrimental effect on us. So in the secular world, though, the general view is, if it's not harming me, then it's not really my problem. As long as it doesn't affect me, it only affects them. Let them do whatever they want. The Torah's view is vastly different. It's the total other end of the viewpoint, the spectrum, which is everyone's actions affect everybody, and therefore, because we live in a world where Hashem put us here to achieve something, that means we all have a common goal. So if that person is not doing what he's supposed to, then that affects me achieving my goal. It affects him; he's not achieving my goal. It affects everybody in a negative way. Oh, and obviously in a positive way. If that person does what he's supposed to, then it has a positive impact on me as well. And this is what the Rambam says on text number 4. He says we have to look at the world. This is page 86. We have to look at the world as hanging in the balance, and your one act can push the world to the side of merit, or God forbid, to the other side. And this is what it says King Solomon meant in Proverbs when he said, a righteous person is the foundation of the world, meaning that a person who acts righteously tips to the balance of the entire world and says it. So this is belief that every individual and his action has universal ramifications and generates an interpersonal responsibility that encompasses every positive or negative act. Any questions before we keep trucking on? Everyone okay? All right, no questions. So the idea of the ship is a very good one, because obviously we don't understand that somebody who's drilling a hole is not just a personal matter. You can't just say he's doing whatever he wants. It affects others. A person who's drilling the hole might say, hey, stop bothering me. I'm doing what I want. But obviously, we say, no, what you do, it affects everybody. So the question is, how do you view yourself? How do you view other people? Do you view yourself as you being on your boat and the other guy being on his boat? And therefore, what he does in his boat is his problem? Or do you view yourself as being on one boat? Well, Judaism takes the view that we're all in the same boat. And what serves as proper action or destructive action, or the Torah, meaning guide, is there to serve as what's healthy maritime action and what is destructive and detrimental action. Any questions? I think it's pretty clear so far.
No questions.
Larry, you have to have a pass before you get up from class. You can't just leave the classroom. So that's the problem when you have you're on video. Where's Ira? Ira's there, but he's afraid to come on camera. He didn't put on makeup. So until now, we discussed a very superficial level, right? That basically we're all in the same boat, and we really that we're not connected. It just happens to be we're on the same boat. Like you go on a flight, do you care about anyone else? No, you just happen to be on the same plane. Or as a line, I sat behind you in history once, right? I mean, it's not really any connection. But Judaism sees the connection between people, between Yidden, between Jews, as far deep. There's a soul connection, because the creditor, and to give the example of the guarantor, the creditor, the borrower, and the guarantor, they're really different. They're really different people, and the guarantor chooses out of his own free will and his generosity to accept responsibility. That's not how Torah and Kabbalah see it. Meaning the responsibility, the connection you have to another person is not a choice. It's actually inherent. Like you can't make that choice. It's embedded in you. Look at text number 5. This is from the Ramak Moshe Kodever, one of the famous Kabbalists, lived in the 1500s, wrote one of the fundamental works on Kabbalah, and he says like this. And he says, not guarantor, but he calls it commingled, where they blend sort of harmoniously. And he says that we each share a part of each other's soul. This is why the responsibility is not a choice. The responsibility is a result because we are commingled. So one Jew does something good, it positively affects another Jew. When a Jew does something that's bad, it inflicts damage upon the other Jew. Therefore, we should all seek out each other's benefit, rejoice in each other's successes, and respect our fellow Jews. We respect ourselves because we really are one. This is the basis of the commandment, love of our fellow Jew. And as the Gemara, which I've quoted many a time, compares the Jewish people to one body. And when one hand is slicing a vegetable or a food, and by mistake cuts the other finger, that left hand doesn't pick up the knife and take revenge on the right hand. I mean, that's insanity, because it inherently feels its oneness, although on the outside it's different. Same thing is for the for the Jewish people. On a soul level too, we are all one, and therefore what we do well complements the other person, and what we don't do well, it hurts the other person. It's interesting that one of the questions that is brought up regarding the text in the Siddur, the text of prayer, is on the days we say Tachnun, and for example, also on Yom Kippur, we confess for our sin. We always use plural. We have sinned. Now, some of the sins you look at there, maybe you haven't done. So Hashem knew I've sinned. Okay, fine. But God knew I was deceitful. Chazal knew I stole. We stole. Maybe you think to yourself in the past 24 hours, or we say it twice a day, right? We say it in the morning by Shachris, and we say it in the afternoon by Mincha. And you think to yourself, I was locked in the office the whole day. I didn't steal. Like last week's class, I didn't use my neighbor's Wi-Fi. My car is parked in my own driveway. Right? Or you look at the Yom Kippur liturgy when the sins are more laid out. You look over there, I didn't do all those things. Or how about a righteous person, a tzaddik? Tzaddik doesn't sin at all. He definitely hasn't done those things. So how come it's said we? There's no we, there's you. So the answer is because this answer because the Jewish people were all one unit. So when one Jew does something wrong, it negatively affects another person. I once heard a story, I forgot which rabbi. His wife's had a problem with her leg. So they went to the doctor. And he came to the doctor with his wife. The doctor said, "What's wrong?" So he said, "Our foot is hurting." It's not her foot. She's, "Our foot is hurting." That's a different way to look at it. So we all have a common identity, and a common identity is based on a common goal. And when one person is not rowing properly or rowing backwards, it affects the entire right. So, talking about rowing, reminds me of the Jews. Yeshiva University decide to get into the rowing competition. And Harvard, Yale, they always come first. And Yeshiva University always come last. So they decided to make a report to figure out what is it that they're doing right and we're doing wrong. So they come back with the report and they say, why does Harvard win or Yale? It's because they have one person yelling and 10 people rowing. As opposed to YU, they have 11 people yelling and only one person rowing, right? So let's take what we learned and let's apply it in real life. Okay, the concept of responsibility, the real mitzvah of responsibility, comes from this famous verse we read 3 weeks ago, which is Lo Salman Adam Re'echa. This is text on page 6a. You can't stand by. Now Maimonides expands that, and he says like this, and pay attention carefully to the words in page 88 in text 6b. And he says, number one, the prohibition forbids us from refraining from intervening to save others. I mean, you have the responsibility. Going back to text to case A, that means Mr. Meek would have the responsibility to prevent disaster. If so was drowning at sea, he knows how to swim. If robbers are planning to kill somebody, you have to dissuade the plotters and protect the victims. Regarding all such cases, we are commanded to not stand by from shedding one's blood. So I was mentioning earlier that in France and Germany, they have something called duty to rescue. They have that in Europe, as opposed to if they don't have it here. But we're going to put that aside because I think we all agree that if you see someone who's trying to hurt another person, you have a responsibility to help them. Let's talk about financial ruling, because that's really what we're talking about over here. So we say secular law does not have a clause to prevent in the United States. We're talking about, since this class is given in the great state of Florida, in the United States of America. So we're going to discuss United States law, but the United States does not have a clause where you have to prevent disaster. We said his crime was in lying to the FBI. His crime was not in lack of reporting of the crime. Now the question is why? Why doesn't secular law have on the books laws that demand a person report crime or is going to be crime? So number one, what are you going to do? You're going to prosecute someone for not doing something? It's a very slippery slope here in both areas. Number one, you're going to demand that someone snitch on another person. It's beginning to sound like Soviet Russia. So in a lot of Western societies, we don't want to prosecute someone who doesn't say something, because then you're going to incentivize, it's going to come like a totalitarian style government. We incentivize people to, going back to the Soviet era Russia. The parents were afraid of the children were afraid of the parents.
Crazy what song?
Now, some
Oh,
states,
I saw it inside. It's nuts, right?
turn up to $10,000.
Somebody's not muted here. You have side music. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was saying that now we have a couple of states who have passed laws where it can be worth up to $10,000 to turn somebody in. So we are starting to pass laws
If they committed a crime, or if they're gonna commit a crime.
if they've committed.
Okay, no, we're talking about over here.
No, but your point was that Germany and so
France.
the style of law that got people to turn, the parents were afraid of their kids were afraid of their parents. We now have laws that are similar. That's frightening.
I'm not exactly sure what we're talking about. But again, you're talking about. We're talking about over here before crime is committed. And also, it's very hard to prosecute someone for not doing something. Yeah, because you have to prove that he knew it. So
and the event hasn't happened.
right,
So a crime has not yet been committed.
right. So it's like so generally, only an act of committing the crime is prosecuted, not the act of. Let's see, you see in the board on the screen, omission. The act of omission is not. So Jewish, but why? Because again, it comes from each one has individual rights, and I can pretty much do whatever I want. We spoke about in class 1, as long as it doesn't cross my individual rights. Don't, like my right to swing your hand ends at the bridge of your nose. That's the kind of view. But the Jewish view looks at us as interconnected and commingled. Therefore, I do have a responsibility. So how does Jewish view that? How do we enforce such a thing? So according to the Torah, interesting, the Torah also, according to the letter of the law in the biblical law, we can only prosecute action. You can't prosecute lack of action. That you can't punish someone for not doing something they were supposed to do. However, 2 points. Number one, I think we discussed this last class, maybe even the first class. The Torah gives the rabbinical court very, very wide, a very broad stroke to enforce societal proper behavior. That means the Torah gives the rabbis the right to make sure people are acting responsibly and properly. It doesn't say what that means. So the rabbis think or see that someone is acting poorly, they can put that guy into shape. They can whip him into shape. Literally, that lashes are called makis mardus, the lashes of a rebellious person. So, for example, they know for a fact that a guy knew about a crime and didn't report it. They can give that guy lashes for punishment. And the lashes don't have to be 39. They can do as much as they want because they're not biblical lashes. Biblical lashes is 39. Rabbinical, they can do until they whip this guy into shape, until they send a message to everybody. That's number one. But let's say they don't know for sure. Many times in the Torah, when we're commanded to do something, or a person can fib and say, "Oh, I meant this, I meant that." We can never be truly sure. The verse many times ends off, "Ani Hashem," I'm God, which is God's message saying, you can fool everyone else, but you can't fool me. And if they don't take care of you, I have 1,001 ways to make sure that justice is done. So we see from here so far that there is, I think I'm behind in my, that we have a responsibility, and the court has the authority to punish somebody who doesn't report a crime, who doesn't do what they're supposed to. Let's talk about now monetary responsibility. Let's talk about, so we know the famous mitzvah is the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. This is not a nice thing to do. Hashavas Aveda is returning a lost object. Many times we look at it, Torah commands us to be a nice person, a good person, a moral person. So if you find something that someone dropped, you have the responsibility, the moral responsibility to return it. That's not true. The Torah gives you a command. Command means, I don't care how you feel if you woke up on the left side of the bed. Command means you do it. So the Torah says, text number 7. Not only, let's start off with number 7, that you have to return a lost object, The rabbis learn out from there in the Gemara, text number 8, Bava Metzia, that it's your job. Obviously, the owner doesn't know. He's not being callous, negligent, right? That's not. The owner doesn't know. It's your job to prevent him from loss. Not only it's your job to return the lost object, like in Ira, your job would have been to close the car. You have to go close the car trunk because it's going to cause loss, right? Or,
Sometimes you don't know the whole story. That the person's keys might be in the trunk when he closes it. So you could be doing something wrong.
okay, so again, so this is
It was better to notify the person, my neighbor, hey, you left your trunk open.
No, I'm not saying again, I was just giving the framework. So obviously you can go to the person and tell them that your trunk is open, but let's say there's no answer at the door, right? Or let's say it's starting to rain. Maybe you don't close it all the way. The point of the matter is, it's not just about after the fact, prosecuting a crime, or after the fact trying to reinstate a loss. The terrorist telling us that our job is to actually try to prevent that loss from ever happening. And you see in text number 8, Rava says the mention of anything comes to include preventing damage from someone else's property. Hanania says to Rava, if you see the flood waters is coming, you have to try to erect a barrier. So from the verse, we see it's your job to try to limit that loss. So the question is, to what extent? Do you have to incur financial loss to prevent your friend's financial loss? So Michael J says no.
No.
Ellen, you've been very quiet. What do you say? Do you have to incur loss to prevent loss?
No. You don't have to incur loss to prevent a loss.
Okay. What if, Michael J, I say, right, I know you like that cup, right? So whatever, right? And I go say, listen, I ran around town, or it cost me $100 to save that cup. And I'm confident that Michael J will reimburse that $100 to me.
I don't like the cup that much.
Whatever. Forget out what it is, right? Let's say I incur financial loss, but it's not like a permanent loss because I'm confident that Michael J will pay me back.
Then what?
Meaning, let's not call it loss. Let's call it, am I obligated to extend myself as in monetarily, put out money, and I'll be paid back in order to prevent loss? Esther, what do you say? Put your camera's a little bit, it's too much on an angle. We don't really see it. Esther, you hear me? Did you understand the question?
Yes, right. Ralph, I hear you.
Did you understand the question?
Not exactly. Let me translate.
The question is, if my friend is going to lose something and I could save it, okay? But there's going to be a cost to me to save it. And I know my friend will pay me back. So let's say it'll cost me $100 to save it. And I know my friend will pay me back the $100. So do I have to lay out the $100 to save my friend from losing $100 or losing whatever it is? Do I have to sort of lend my friend money?
Yeah,
Yes,
I
you
know.
do.
I understand. Well, I think really at the impossible situation that we have, we can continue with that situation if to preserve that things until a person that I know, and I tell you before, hey, I have let me think about, I have your dog that you lost, and this person is not here near me. He's in another city, probably in a work, and he can't come back to carry his dog. So I have to carry this dog, but the problem is if I don't have any money to take care of this dog. So
Okay.
in that situation, probably I can tell that person, look, I can't carry this dog, but I can give to another person that I know that that person can care to you, but you have to pay for
Okay,
that.
okay, so but a dog is a little bit of a, let's not use a living creature, because let's say something that for example can't fit in your garage, right? The guy left it outside, I don't know, right? And a generator, and you say, okay, I'll rent him a storage, and you're confident they'll pay you back. You have to go through that. So let's address it. So obviously, there is no dollar amount on saving a life. That means you have to put out as much money as whatever the cost is to save that person's life, and then that person has to pay you back. You could take that person. The person can say to you, "Oh well, it was your choice to save my life. I appreciate it, but I'm not forced halakhically to reimburse you." The court actually forces that person to reimburse you for saving his life, no matter what the cost is. The question is about property. Let's look at text number 9. This is interesting stuff. So the Gemara says like this: you don't have to lose money to save another person's property. You don't have to. We learn it out from, for example, if you have your object alongside your father's, it uses the example of father and teacher, because these are two people that every person is obligated to honor to the utmost extent. It says with your parent, you can never fulfill that obligation. And your teacher who teaches you Torah and brings you into the world to come, you can never fulfill that obligation. So anytime it wants to be an example of someone that you have to go beyond, it's father, parent, or teacher. So if you have your object and your parent's object, or your teacher's object, yours takes precedence, which basically means that you have no obligation to extend yourself for someone else's property if it's going to come at a loss to you. But then Rabbi Yehuda says like this. Listen here. He says, however, look at the last paragraph there. However, people who are strict in this application, basically somebody who's too exact over here in the letter of the law, in the end they're going to be at the receiving end. When it comes to kindness and compassion, don't be such a stickler for the law. Go beyond. There's a famous story which has been borrowed in many other places. This story was printed over 100 years ago. It's been printed in other contexts. But the story goes like this. The story is called Ben Yehoyada. This is an Iraqi scholar, I think in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So he writes the story. He says, there was once a man who had an elderly father who he neglected, didn't clothe him, didn't feed him, didn't care for him, and he basically kicked the elderly man away. And the elderly man sat with the paupers of the city. And it was a cold day, and this elderly man was sitting with the paupers, and his grandson, which is his son's son, walking by, and he recognizes his grandson. He says, "Please go ask your father, I'm cold, for a coat." So the son goes to his father and said, "Past, granddad, and he's freezing. Can you give me a coat?" So the son is a heart of stone. He said, "Go upstairs to the attic. I have an old coat hanging there on the nail." The grandson goes up, and there on the nail is a tattered coat. It looks like it's about to fall apart. So the son takes the coat downstairs, and before he walks out the door, he takes his scissor and he cuts it in half. So the father asks the son, he says, "What are you doing?" He says, half of the coat I'm giving to granddad, and half of the code I'm saving. So when you're old and I kick you out of the house and you're cold, I have something to give you.
Yeah.
And then the guy realized, right? So first of all, the Gemara starts off by saying, you don't have to take a loss. You're not obligated to lose money in order to save someone else from losing money, right? And we use the extreme example of a father, a parent, and a child. However, if you know for sure that the person will reimburse you, then you have to, because it's not a loss. But if you're not sure, then you don't have to. Then you don't have to. You don't have to take a loss. But it's the nice thing to do. Now, why? Oh, 1 second. Let's think of this example. What if the effort and the cost to save the object is more than the object? What if it's going to cost me $100 to save Michael J's cup, which is worth $15? Do you still do it? So the answer is yes, because the value of an object is not just the value of the object, because the value also is a relationship between the object and the owner. Certain things, for example, are only sentimental value. The object has no real value, but the person has value. So your obligation, you're trying to help that person. So you don't go, oh, it's only $15, it's going to cost me $100. Yeah, but what if you got that as a graduation present? I don't know. What if it's you don't know. Your job is to prevent the loss of a friend, not to get into cheshbainis and to start thinking, and then start thinking of what's the value. Now, what if you're not sure the person's going to pay you back? Are you legally obligated? No, but you should. And we shouldn't get into the habit of only doing things that we're legally obligated. Because remember, we live, so to speak, on borrowed time, all of us, and everything we have is a gift. Don't be so square. Now let's go to case B. Case B, if you remember, Rachel was walking by the store, and she saw that the store is off, and it's hot, and the air conditioning is blowing. How much of obligation does she have to try to track down the store owner to tell them that the air conditioner is on? So based on what we said now, she would have the obligation, especially it's not costing her, to try to track down the owner. Now, if it's a loss, does she have to? No, but she should, like we said in case B, she can go to the nearby stores to try to call the owner, tell him. She should definitely put in the effort to try to stop him from having a loss, right? So she's not legally compelled, but she can be held accountable by the boss until the damage is compensated. Any questions?
No.
Nope.
Okay. Let's go even further. The Shulchan Aruch says something, really strong. Look at text number 10. He says, if you find something belonging to your friend, and let's say or not but let's say the guy would not bother to go and get it, that's not your business. Your business is to restore your friend's object. If he threw it out, that's one thing. But if he forgot it, it's your responsibility. Torah gives you the responsibility to return the object to your friend. The fact that he doesn't want to go out and get it, that's not your. It says that the Torah does not allow us to spare any effort, even if the effort is great and the value of the item is minimal. So we see over here. So Rachel has to tell the store owner. Even you're going to say, with the store owner, maybe the store owner, after finding out, will say, hey, I'm not going to get out of bed and drive across town to where my store is. Rachel doesn't know that. Rachel doesn't know where the store owner is. If she knows for sure the store owner doesn't care, it's fine. Rachel doesn't know over here that the store owner is not going to come, not going to bother to come back. So it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to do the right thing. Now, what happens if a person doesn't do the right thing? So we see this, for example, as in the Tosefta. Let's say, for example, you are a witness to a financial transaction, and one of the parties is denying, or there's some doubt in that financial transaction, and you being the witness will add validity. And if you don't testify, then someone's going to lose money here. So the question is, if later they find out that you knew testimony, you didn't testify, you have to pay. Because let's say because you didn't testify, now this guy lost $100 is the loss on the witness now. So the answer is no, because you didn't borrow the money and you didn't directly cause him the loss.
So you're a witness to the transaction, not a guarantor
Right.
of the transaction.
So a witness to the transaction doesn't have to pay if he fails to testify. Let's
Seems a little wrong.
now what? Should the witness have to pay?
No, it seems like the witness should be obligated to give testimony.
No, he is obligated to give testimony.
But if he didn't,
There's different types of averas, right? So there's avera that you have to do, and if a person doesn't do them, then there's a financial, result. But here, the Torah is saying that if you know testimony, there's actually a verse in the Torah. It says, if you know testimony, you have to testify. The Torah doesn't say what happens if you don't. It just says you will bear the sin. Now, it makes you a question. Do you think it makes sense that the witnesses should have to pay?
not necessarily whatever the monetary amount is, because it could have witnessed a transaction that was for $1 million.
Doesn't make a difference. But if the witnesses by lack of testifying, by not testifying, calls
Somebody's
this.
out $1 million.
So according to halacha, the witnesses don't have to pay. But look at the last line of text 11. God's saying you're not going to get away easy until you pay. Because yes, the witness didn't directly cause the loss because he didn't, deny. He's not the one denying. Remember, the reason why the witness is there is because one of the parties are lying, right? So if the lender lent $1 million and thought the witnesses are going to testify, and the borrower says, "No, I never borrowed anything from you. I only borrowed $500,000." It's the one who's lying over here is the borrower. So he's directly causing the loss, but it's because of the witness, and because of that, he has a spiritual responsibility. Hashem says, "I'll take care of it." All right. Any questions before we move on to the next point? No idea what time is it?
8:25.
Not too bad. Okay. Let's talk about with case study number 3, spiritual responsibility. How much responsibility do we have to our fellows' actions as a matter of religious observance? Because we already spoke about over here before, physical harm or monetary harm. Okay, now we're going to talk about spiritual observance, where the other guy's spiritual observance seemingly, at least on the surface, has nothing to do with you, but we've already learned it does. But how much responsibility do you have to try to talk to another person? So if you see someone doing something wrong, you have a responsibility to tell them they're doing something wrong. So we learned a few weeks ago, Pashas Kedoshim, the answer is yes. You should surely critique your fellow, and you will not share in their guilt. And Maimonides expands upon this. Text number 13, a person shouldn't say, "No, if he doesn't have error, it's his problem. No, it's my job to do what I got to do. It's his job to do what he's got to do." This attitude is antithetical to Torah. Rather, we are commanded to do the right thing and to see that other one's doing it. So, is it your business if the other person is doing what they're supposed to? The answer is yeah, because especially talking about spiritual activities, since we're all united on a soul level, therefore, minding my own business is making sure you're doing your business properly. Now, it doesn't mean you come in standing on top of your white soapbox and you say, you're going to hell and you're going to hell, I'm going to have, if you don't shape up, that's not what it's talking about over here. Critique of it. The Rebbe spoke about this at length, and the Alter Rebbe spoke about this in Tanya, that the mitzvah to critique a fellow is tied into that means there's a way to go about it. So just like, for example, right, the guarantor, you want this guy to pay back, otherwise you're on the hook. You're the guarantor.
Yeah.
So the same thing is, you want this guy to put on tefillin, you want this woman to light Shabbos candles, and you want it to be kosher because it helps. So how do you go about it? You go to bat and say, sinner, if you don't stop violating Shabbos, you're burning hell. See how far that gets you. You can go back and say, I did what I was supposed to. Reminds me of that parable. It's awful parable, but it's very powerful about the poor man and the rich man and the piece of fish. You remember this one? No.
No.
I love you guys. So it's like
Every year you just restart the stories.
exactly. Just put a quarter in and just. So the story goes.
Play it over again. Play it again, Sam.
Play it again, Sam. Thanks. So the story goes that there was a rich man in town who was a terrible miser, heart of stone. And this poor man was traveling, hadn't eaten in a few days. He comes to this nice house and he's hoping for a nice meal. He comes to the door, and he asks, for a meal. And the rich man says, "You obviously haven't heard about me. I don't give charity." He says, "Please, I'm dying. My stomach's empty. I haven't had anything to eat in days." He says, "Get out of here. There's a local charity. Not here. He says, "Please, I'm so weak. I can't move. Please give me something." So the rich man sees this poor guy is not going to leave him alone. And there's nothing he hates worse than poor people. So you're not going to get him something, actual food. So he remembers that yesterday he ate fish. He goes into the garbage can and he didn't eat the whole fish. So he gives him some fish, and the fish smells bad. But the poor man is so hungry, he puts down the fish. Now, because he was hungry, and because the fish wasn't right, so the poor man got sick. The rich man comes home from shul and he says, "It's tells his wife, I'm going to be a little late for lunch. I have to go visit this man who's in the hospital. I have to go visit him. It's mitzvah, Bikur Chaylim." And then he comes back and he tells his wife, "I'm going to be a little late for Ma'ariv because remember that man I visited in the hospital? He died. And there's a mitzvah of halvayas ames, to escort." And then later, the next morning, he tells his wife, "I'm going to be late for breakfast because there's a mitzvah of menachem oven." He comes back and he tells his wife later that day, he says, "From one lousy, stinking piece of fish, I got the mitzvah of Chnas Zarchim, welcoming guest, Bikur Chaylim, visiting the sick, Avoyas Ames, escorting the dead, and menachem oven, comforting the family." I mean,
That's what you get for giving a bad piece of fish. Okay.
right? So the idea is, a person shouldn't think, I'm righteous. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. If I go to him and say, "You're a sinner, you're going to hell," then I'm going to feel good about myself. That's not the way. Because if you care about another person and you really want them to partake in a behavior or cease and desist from a certain behavior, you have to find a way to speak their language. You got to find a way. First thing you got to do is you got to find a way to know that you care about them. So look what Maimonides writes. When you talk to somebody, when you critique somebody regarding an interpersonal issue or a religious matter, first of all, you got to be done privately. You walk into shul and you say, "You know what you are? Sinner." Second of all, it has to be done. And third of all, you have to speak patiently. And the person has to know that it's not about you feeling like you want to do the mitzvah, and therefore you're saying these words. They have to know that you care about them, and that's why you're doing what you do. So when you're trying to, let's say, for example, stop a person from sin, it's not only that we're trying to save Yankel Shmel from getting hurt, because when Ben Yosef Binyamin commits the crime, it's something bad for him also. So we're trying to save the victim, and we're also trying to save the perpetrator, because again, we're all part of one unit. And the rule is, and the Rebbe would quote this very often, that Dvarim hayetzim min halev nichnasim min halev. The words that come from the heart enter the heart. You can't fake being genuine. You can't. When you're genuine, people know that you're genuine. People see it. People know when people care about them. You try to fake that you care about people, it's picked up right away. So when you go to somebody and you say, listen, that I'm speaking to you because this is something that's good for you. Forget about me. Then they pick up on it. So again, the difference between Jewish law and secular law, the secular law really is really focused on it, and we discussed this in previous JLI courses. It's focusing on punishment. We punish in order to deter other crimes, but as far as preventing, that's not really our. So our job, based on what we're saying here, our job is to try to assist, encourage, and make it as easy as possible for people to do mitzvot and learn Torah, which is why we have Chabadists all over the world. And because every Jew is united with another Jew, and because every person is really happy and content by another person doing a mitzvah, it's a very interesting law. Do I have to ask to borrow your tefillin? If you leave your tefillin in shul or your talis,
No, you don't ask.
you don't have to ask. But why? Because normally I can't utilize. Let's say we're friends. Let's get ahead of ourselves. Let's say we're friends, right? I can't just go borrow your lawnmower. He's my friend. I'm sure he would listen. You would lend it to me. No, you have to ask. Like the famous joke goes, this guy has this is a Northeast joke, right? The guy sitting in his after a snowstorm, he just bought a new snow blower, and he's sitting. Remember this one? And he's sitting.
I just remember snowblowers.
And he's sitting in his living room. All of a sudden, a brick comes flying through his window, and his neighbor says, "The heck with you and your snowblower." He comes out and he says, well, "What's going on?" So he says, "I saw you had a snowblower, and I wanted to borrow it." I'm thinking to myself, he's going to lend me his brand new snowblower. It's brand new. And I thought to myself, when he needed a drill, I lent it to him. So what kind of guy is this? I said, "You know something? I don't need you or your snowblower." The guy says, he didn't even ask. Ask him. I'll surely lend you my snowblower. So when it comes to equipment like that, you have to ask. But when it comes to talis and tefillin and shofar, you don't have to ask. Well, I could look at text number 15. We assume that a person wants a mitzvah to be done with their property. Obviously, if there's not going to be any financial loss, and we see that in blessings as well. The fact that we're all sanctified, the fact that we're all part of one, all part of one thing, all part of one unit. So I can make a bracha on another person's behalf, right? I can make kiddush. Everyone answers amen, hamotzi, for example, or I see on the screen shofar. Why? Because we're all part of one unit. But the precondition is that we all have to be part of that one unit. Meaning that if one person is not obligated, then he's not part of the unit. So only a kid, for example, can't blow shofar for an adult. A kid can't read the Megillah for an adult. A kid can make kiddush because a child is obligated in sanctification of Shabbos. A woman may read the Megillah because a woman for everyone else, because the woman is obligated to read the Megillah. So he's saying, and not only that, the fact that we're all one unit goes even a step further. Let's say I blow the shofar, and I fulfilled my obligation, and I meet. Actually, I don't know much. I don't know if you guys know this, but when services are over, on Rosh Hashanah, I go blow shofar for other people because it's mitzvah for people to hear shofar. So now, when I go to these other people's houses or offices, now I heard the shofar already, and I made the blessing. Who makes the blessing here? They can't read Hebrew. Do I make the blessing again? Now, by the way, making the blessing is not something to be trifled with. This is God's name. And number 3 of the 10 commandments is you cannot take God's name in vain. So do you make the blessing or not? The answer is, text number 18, you do. Why? Because text number 19 says, because all Jews are responsible for another person, so consequently, look at his words. If my fellow hasn't fulfilled their obligation, then I haven't fulfilled my obligation. Even though I blew the shofar and I heard the Megillah, whatever it is. Even though I did what I was supposed to, the fact that another Jew didn't do what he was supposed to or she was supposed to, that means there's something lacking in mine. So going back to the Pew study, do we have an obligation to go out and make Judaism more attractive to other people? The answer is 100,000,000% yes. Let's look at a video. And this is where second's gonna be back. Good play.
דבר was כל ישראל ערבים זה בזה. Nur das meint man a viele Aiden, was gefindt sich bekatz wie Tevel und ist sich mit dem keinmal nicht zusammengetroffen. Punkt als wie sich hat sich lieb, on mit Dides und on Agbolis, hat da sein der Ringen von Avas Israel auf der Zweiten. Und in was besteht hat die Jahwe, ist in der Linie von Teiro Mitzvah, sein Nechet alle Jiden, Arevin, Zeh, sie können nicht sein, der Limud der Teire Beschleimus und der Kima Mitzvah Beschleimus, Bishas Achelik von Nem, was Kol Israel, Kulam Yachad, ist Kima Schleimo, ist der Chelik, Leisator, nicht Scholem Belimud der Teiro und nicht Scholem Bekima Mitzvah. Und das soll sein verbunden mit allen Jiden, wo sie sollen sich nicht gefunden.
Und wie mir sagt, dass bei Venezuela Arabim, Lezareno Arab, Anegel Lepel, was sie jeder Tag gehen verloren, Nishomis von Bnei und Bnei Israel, was Chas v'Sholem sagen auf eine Schoma, auf eine Jiden, als ist im Ganzen verloren, aber verloren in dem Muvon. Amit darf mit dem Ton morgen abbringen dem Nenter zur Jüdischkeit, wird es darf ein Ton in mehrere Unionen und darf sich da wieder der Ton kommen. Mit der Sache mehr Schwierigkeiten, wie viel das ist ein Inyan, Ikri, und ein Inyan Chiyuni, und ein Inyan von Pikuach Nefashis Mamosh, aber soll reis nehmen, der Hero, und der Hero soll reis in Meise bepeil. A jeder Nesef Avdru, was tut bei Momene. Nesef Avdru, was tut bei Nishmose, alle Dei, Lilmed und Lelamed, soll reiche Ton begufe, wann geht zu Apozas Ayadus, und bei Meise bepeil, gehen bepeil, Mamesh begufe, und reden bepeil, Mamesh bepiv. Und bei Weisen nach lebendigem Beispiel Befehl Mamesh Beramach Evron, Beshasag Gidel, was mit darf lernen in Teir und Mekayim sein ihre Mitzvahs, wo mal viele haben, Mekayim Nefesh Achas mi Yisrael. Ist Echet Mekayim Kilo Kiyim Elo Mole, Alachas Kama Vekama Vimizetos Befehl, Abekeiche Shol Kol Echad Veiachas, was nimmt auf sich gehen, mäfig sein Jadus. Zwischen Iden hat mich schön gesehen, mit seinen Matzel gewinnt Kammer, wie Kammer eine Fosche ist, und Massel gewesen in Asami Nefen, wie gerät früher bei Negehe, zu Meise Chio, a die Wemens haben Massel gewesen, seine dann noch geworden Mazilim, seine geworden Echet Maschpien, und auf Gehen und Massel sein Iden, was einander, was zu sehen, gekonnt zukommen, Meise Zibische Tier.
I'm laughing because he saw that that video of the guys putting on fill-in of the Roman legion by the
Looked like the Colosseum.
Coliseum. So 20 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was backpacking Europe, my friend and I went to the Coliseum. There was a Jewish guy there. I think it was an Israeli guy dressed up as a legion. You take a picture with him, and I put on fill-in. I have a picture with him for the Roman legion by the Coliseum. It's funny. I started that. I had to find that picture somewhere in the album. Look at that. It's funny out of all the things that they put in there. Anyway,
Quick
Let's-
question, Morton.
yeah,
You gave an example about reading the Megillah, that a child cannot read the Megillah to an adult. Two things. What's the definition of a child in that?
under bar mitzvah.
Under bar mitzvah. Okay. So it leads to the question, if the adult is blind and can't read it, and the child who's 11 is the only person around that can read it, what happens in that situation?
Good question.
You do what you have to do. There's nobody else there, and the child's the only one who can read.
Well, why don't you do a Megillah for Megillah? You can do the Megillah in Braille.
Sure.
I'm sure they probably have it.
Available and get it. Yes, absolutely. If he's poor and he can't get it and they don't have it, and
If
right. So if the situation, based on what he said, is there's
there's
only the two of them, there's nobody else.
Yeah, but again, but that in that case, yeah. But when I'm talking about reading the Megillah, I'm talking about fulfilling the obligation of hearing the Megillah from a kosher scroll and all that.
Yeah.
All right. So to finish off,
So just wait. Let's finish with this, which is if there is any way for the blind man to hear the Megillah properly, whether he goes somewhere or whether somebody can come to him, that's the proper way.
yes, to hear the mitzvah is to hear the Megillah. So it's your responsibility, not only my responsibility, to have a positive impact on Jews all over, and to let them know that Judaism is exciting, it's fun, not to be intimidated to explore their Jewish heritage, and it's not something just nice to do as a commendable act. Like we started off the class, you actually have a moral responsibility, not only to the other person, to actually have a responsibility to yourself. Exercise 3.1 on page 98 is how can you better apply this concept of responsibility in a personal life. Next week, what does it mean to be free? Is a life of, is key points here first? Is a life of religious observance compatible with religious freedom? Right? When the United States, we believe in freedom. Is it freedom of religion, freedom from religion? How do we balance the two?
Lesson 3. Beyond taking offense. 1. Judaism has a very broad definition of mutual responsibility. It's based on a vision of shared purpose and mission, which is influenced by each action of every person. 2. In addition to a shared mission, Jewish mysticism teaches that our souls are united. 3. Jewish law considers it a crime to remain silent when aware of a threat to someone else's life, and it also mandates that we extend every effort necessary to protect others from monetary loss. 4.
The Jewish value of mutual responsibility calls on us to guide others away from transgression of the Torah's commandments. This must be done gently and be motivated by genuine concern for their spiritual welfare. 5.
Hey,
Jewish law also teaches that we are responsible to assist others in the performance of mitzvot. Our own mitzvah observance is incomplete until we do so.
right. Muy bien. Thank you so much for coming. We'll send out the emails, additional links that we have in the back, the Rebbe's 10-point campaign in order to make the world a far better place. Any questions before we adjourn?
Thank you.
All right. I hope to see everyone on Shabbos. Ellen, we miss you guys. Take care, guys. See you in Shabbos.